All right. So, we are in, like I said, Jeremiah 9. And in our books, this is called the Second Temple Address. Chapters 9 and 10 just continues. It's the same address. It's just continuing on with what he talked about in chapters 7 and 8. And again, addressing the people from the temple and about the temple and about their responsibility. So we'll go ahead with our questions in our workbook. Question number 1. Did Jeremiah ever feel like giving up the role of a prophet? Did he ever feel like it was too difficult?
Yeah.
Yes, he sure did.
Yeah.
Probably on more than one occasion, considering all the things that he's, had went through. He talked about how many tears he had shed, how he had wept day and night. He said he wished he had a lodging place in the wilderness so that he could leave the people and go from them. So yeah, he was very, very much ready to go. Kind of like Elijah. That's what the reference in our book, 1 Kings 19, is about Elijah. Elijah felt the same way more than once, that he wanted to be gone and away from everybody and away from all the people. So it's a very natural response sometimes. Question 2. What were the conditions in the land that discouraged Jeremiah? Verses 3 through 6. What were some of the things that are mentioned?
Liars, deceit, slanderers.
Yeah. They were dishonest. They were deceiving people. They slandered people. He talks about, and every neighbor will walk with slanderers. So apparently this was very common. Not just some isolated cases, but it says in verse 5, they weary themselves to commit iniquity. They were sinning so much that they were tiring themselves out. Well, that's quite a bit when they're doing that. So yeah, the conditions in the land, and he had talked about this in chapter 7 and 8 as well. How bad they were. How bad the conditions were. And these were God's people. Right now, he's not really talking about the pagans. He's talking about God's own people and how bad they were. Okay. Then question 3. What was God's reaction to the spiritual and moral failures of the people? This is in verses 7 through 9. What was his reaction? What was he wanting to do that they needed? Try him. He's going to, he talks about refining them in the fire, trying to get rid of the dross, get rid of the sin. He talked about melting them in the furnace of affliction. And of course, that's why they're going to go into captivity, is so that he can get rid of that idolatry. And of course, idolatry was, probably at the top of the list of sins that the people needed to get purified from. And so he likens it to putting, an ore into a furnace and melting away the bad parts and keeping the good. All right. Then, question 4. Why was the nation to be set on fire with the wrath of God? Now, this is verses 12 through 16. And it's probably good. Would someone mind reading? It's kind of a long read, but I think it's a good one. Verses 12 through 16.
Who is the wise man who may understand this? And who is he to whom the mouth of the Lord has spoken, that he may declare it? Why does the land perish and burn up like a wilderness, so that no one can pass through? And the Lord said, because they have forsaken my law, which I set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, nor walked according to it. But they have walked according to the dictates of their own hearts, and after the Baals which their fathers taught them. Therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Behold, I will feed them, this people, with wormwood, and give them water of gall to drink. I will scatter them also among the Gentiles, whom neither they nor their fathers have known, and I will send a sword after them until I have consumed them.
All right. They were going to be a heap of ruins. They were going to be a heap of ruins. That's what he's telling them. Because of the fact that they had forsaken God's law, they had rebelled against God's law, they hadn't obeyed his voice, and they had followed other gods. So it says he was going to give them wormwood and gall to drink. All right. So question 5, why were mourners called, and did others need to be taught this skill so that there would be enough of them? This is verses 17 through 22. So first of all, why were mourners called? Why did they have mourners back at this time? And even in the first century they did too. They would even hire mourners when what happened? When someone did what? Died. Right? So he's talking about a funeral, basically the funeral of the nation, Judah's funeral. And they were going to have mourners because the people had forgotten. And they'd forgotten God. They had forsaken the land. And of course, he's looking to the future where they were going to be cast out of their dwellings, their homes, the city, all of it. And death had come. And of course, it was coming. A lot of Jeremiah talks about things already happening that was going to happen soon because it was certain. Prophets did this a lot. God's prophets would talk about something as if it had already happened, but it hadn't. And it was because God was going to make sure it happened. So, yeah, this was Judah's funeral that he's talking about. And how the land had been forsaken. The people had been plundered. They were ashamed. Their eyelids were gushing with water, and others needed to be taught this skill so that there would be enough of them. He talks about verse 20, teach your daughters wailing and every one her neighbor a lamentation. There was going to be so much need for mourners that he was telling them, teach your children how to mourn because there's going to be a lot of reason to mourn. People would, carcasses, dead bodies would be everywhere. The city would be destroyed, homes and buildings and the temple and all of it. He talked about how he entered our palaces to kill off the children. So, yeah, it was going to be a time of great mourning. He talks about the carcasses shall fall as refuse. There was going to be so many. All right, then moving on. Question 6, what do people usually glory or boast in before others?
How smart they are and how rich they are.
Yeah, look how smart I am, look how much I have, or look how much power I have, all of it. Yep, that's exactly right. Paul refers to this in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, almost the exact same thing. How people would boast, he was writing to Corinth, boast about those same things, about their own knowledge, their own riches, their own power. So it is something that has plagued mankind for a long time. And so in verses 23 and 24, Jeremiah says that This is what man's glory should be. So what should it be instead of those things? It should be what?
That he knows the Lord.
Yeah. Knows God. Understands. That's what. That he understands and knows me. Verse 24. Okay. Question 7 comes from verses 25 and 26. What does it mean to be uncircumcised in the heart? He also refers to Deuteronomy 10:16. They were what?
When you're cut in the heart, what does that?
Yeah, when you're cut to the heart, it means you're just like those people in Acts chapter 2. You know, they felt sorrow. They felt they needed to do something. Well, these people, sometimes the Bible uses the phrase stiff-necked. That's what they were. They were rebellious. They were not sorry for what they had done. They weren't experiencing grief for their sins. They weren't like that at all. They were simply rebellious people. And they weren't allowing God's word, God's law to penetrate into their heart so it would change them. They weren't doing that at all. All right. Now we'll move into chapter 10. Still talking from the temple. Jeremiah is still talking from the temple. Question 8. What were the pagans doing, and what warning is given concerning these practices? So this is verses 1 through 5, and then he also references Isaiah 44 and Psalms 115. So what all were they doing?
They were making idols.
Yeah, they were making idols, right? They were making idols. And of course, that's what Isaiah and Psalms both refers to too. Like in verse 3, it says, "For one cuts a tree from the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They decorate it with silver and gold, fasten it with nails and hammers so that it won't topple. They're upright like a palm tree. They cannot speak. They have to be carried. They cannot go by themselves." It says, "Do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, nor they can do any good." Jeremiah says, it's just a piece of wood. He says, you made it yourself. Why in the world would you bow down and worship something that you went out in the woods, cut down, and carved? Jeremiah says, they can't do anything. They can't do evil. They can't do good. The only thing they're good for is to be burned. So why would people be so dumb? Yes.
The New American Standard in verse 5 says, like a scarecrow in a cucumber field.
Okay. Like a scarecrow in a cucumber field. Powerless, worthless, of no good, empty value. But yet all of these people were doing that. That's what they were doing. They were worshiping something they had made with their own hands. So, yeah, as crazy as that is, making idols. Okay, question 9. Describe the authority and majesty of God in contrast to the idols. This is verses 6 through 10. Anybody have something they can write there, or that they wrote down? Some of the things that Jeremiah includes there about God that none of the idols had. Go ahead.
There's none like.
Yeah, there's none like. Okay, idols are not like God. They're not even in any way like God. God is powerful. He has might. He has wisdom. He's eternal. Like verse 10, he's the real God, the living God. At his wrath, the earth will tremble. So God is the one that's actually in control. Of course, this is what Daniel talks about, in some of his prophecies, like in Daniel 2, he talks about God. Would someone read verse 21 of Daniel 2? This kind of goes right along with it. Daniel 2, verse 21. This fits in with these 10 or 5 verses here. Daniel 2, verse 21.
And he changes the times and the seasons. He moves kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding.
So God is the one in control. He's the one that raises up kings. He's the one that brings kings down. It's him. It's not these silly little wooden idols that you build. They don't have any power to do anything. All right. So question 10, what will become of the idols and those who worship them? Beginning in verse 11. Thus you shall say to them, the gods that have not made the heavens and the earth shall perish from the earth and from under these heavens. He's made the earth by his power. He's established the world by his wisdom and has stretched out the heavens at his discretion. When he utters his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens. He causes the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He makes lightning for the rain. He brings the wind out of his treasures. It's just talking about how powerful God is and what he's able to do. And then he talks about what's going to happen to the idols. Everyone is dull-hearted without knowledge. Every metalsmith is put to shame by an image, for his molded image is falsehood and there's no breath in them. They're futile, a work of errors. In the time of their punishment they shall perish. The portion of Jacob is not like them, for he's the maker of all things, and Israel is the tribe of his inheritance. The Lord of hosts is his name. Yeah, those idols are going to perish. You know, they're just made out of wood. That's all. And it's interesting, verse 11 there in our text is the only verse in the entire book of Jeremiah that's written in Aramaic. Everything else written in Hebrew. One verse is in Aramaic, and there's all kinds of explanations about why that might be, but possibly because that verse has a lot to do with all the nations around, which would speak Aramaic, I guess. But anyway, God controls nature, and he controls nature because he created it. He created nature. He made the world, he made the water, he made the sky, the air, the plants, the animals, the minerals. He made it all. It's all God. He's the one that made it. These idols didn't make anything. Didn't make a thing. Okay, question 11 then. For what is Judah to prepare, and how will this event affect Jeremiah? This is verses 17 through 20. So what are they supposed to do, and how are they supposed to prepare for what's going to happen? What does he tell them in verse 17?
Gather up your wares.
Gather up your stuff because you're not staying. I mean, that's it. Gather up your stuff because you're not staying. You're going to be thrown out of the land. Verse 18, I will throw out at this time the inhabitants of the land. All right, the ones that survived were going to be taken into captivity. Just like Daniel and his friends, and just like Ezekiel and those with him, they were going to be kicked out of the land. And verse 19 talks about how they're going to be hurt. Their wounds would be severe. All right? They were going to be slung into a far land. That's what was going to happen to them. They're going to be slung into a far land. So he's telling them, get ready. It's going to happen. All right. Question 12. Have the people of Judah had good leadership to give them protection? Would someone read verses 21 and 22 for us?
For the shepherds have become stupid and have not sought the Lord. Therefore they have not prospered. And all their flock is scattered. The sound of a report, behold, it comes. A great commotion out of the land of the north. to make the cities of Judah a desolation, a haunt of jackals.
All right. He references chapter 23, verses 1 and 2, that talks about them the same way. These were the leaders, the elders of the people. These are the ones that should have been telling the people over time to get rid of idols, come back to God, don't rebel. But they weren't. The people had not had good leadership at all. And of course, Ezekiel 34 is a classic chapter about leaders of God's people and their responsibility. That section there in Ezekiel 34 is really good about leadership too. So these shepherds, these leaders, elders had a responsibility, and they were not carrying out that responsibility at all. Question 13, can man direct his own way morally and spiritually apart from God's revelation? So would someone read verses 23 and 24?
O Lord, I know the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man who walks to direct his own steps. O Lord, correct me, but with justice, not in your anger, lest you bring me to nothing.
Okay, of course, verse 23, really well-known verse in Jeremiah. We, by ourselves, do not know the best way to live. That's why God had to reveal it in his word. That's why revelation is so important. And so he says, correct me, but with justice, not in your anger, lest you bring me to nothing. So he wants that phrase there about lest you bring me to nothing. We've already read where God is talking about a remnant. A remnant. So there was going to be a remnant that would be saved. In other words, Jeremiah is asking for, please, no total destruction. No total destruction for us. That's what they deserved, but he was pleading that would not happen. All right, did the fact that God used the Gentile nations to punish his people free the Gentile nations from responsibility for their vicious attitude? Would someone read verse 25?
Pour out your fury on the Gentiles who do not know you, and on the families who do not call on your name, for they have eaten up Jacob, devoured him and consumed him, and made his dwelling place desolate.
All right. And he mentions other verses in this chapter that said the same thing. All right. So these Gentile nations, whichever ones they were, okay, in particular, of course, he's talking about Babylon because they're the ones coming in from the north. But any other nations would be punished. And of course, the Babylonian Empire would be punished by the Persian Empire later. So they would be punished. And so the Gentiles here are those Gentile nations like Babylon, who God was using to try and teach Judah, his people, a lesson. He did that with the Assyrians on the northern tribes. Now he's doing it with the Babylonians for the southern tribes. But it's all about teaching a lesson. You know, the book of Hebrews talks about that as well, about God disciplining his people so we would be corrected. Well, that's what he's doing. And so you know, throughout this, Jeremiah is pleading with the Jews, all right, to surrender to the Babylonians. Don't fight them. Okay, God has already told you that, you know, if you fight, you're going to lose. It's inevitable. Don't fight them, because that's just going to cause more people to be killed. So, you know, preserve what little you have left. They didn't listen to Jeremiah. You know, you don't see anybody listening to Jeremiah in the entire book. It's like Jeremiah had 0 converts during that like 60 years that he preached. That'd be pretty rough. No converts in 60 years. That'd be pretty difficult to deal with. But we never hear about a single person that listened to Jeremiah at all. They just, now that didn't stop him. He kept going on and on and on, but people didn't listen to him.
Wouldn't there have to have been some who did, that didn't fight, so some were taken by captivity? Because
Well, no.
if none of them would have listened, they all would have fought and they all would have died.
Well, I think there were a lot of people that didn't believe until it happened. And then those were taken into captivity. And I don't know the numbers. I don't remember. We could go back to Ezra and Nehemiah and look at the number of people that came back. But Jeremiah had a rough old time. You know, he had a rough, probably of any of the prophets, he had the worst life. He had the worst life because he couldn't get people to listen to him. They just wouldn't. And it was very sad. Jeremiah is projecting into the future what's going to happen, as if it's already happened. It hadn't happened yet, but it's inevitable. And Jeremiah wants this remnant. He wants a remnant to be saved, but so many people just wouldn't listen, and it was very sad. Well, Lord willing, next week, going to look at chapters 11, 12, and 13, lesson 7. And you'll see that there's a lot of reading and a lot of questions, so I don't know that we can get through that in one time. It's about the covenant, as he calls it, the covenant disobeyed and the consequences. All right? The covenant, of course, of God. And then, of course, he's going to talk later about the new covenant that would be coming as well. All right. Well, thank you very much.